Hi, this is Patrick Yankee, and you're listening to Awakened Nation with Brad Zalas.
A huge shift is taking place on planet Earth. People seem to be waking up. Tired of the way things used to be, they are creating something brand new and changing the world we live in. My name is Brad Zalas, and I get to sit down with the next generation of idea makers, the disruptors, and the game changers. Everyday people just like you and me from all over who are doing amazing things to Awakened Nation.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are a fan of leadership and leadership principles that not only affect your business, but cascade into your life and your relationships, you're going to love today's guest, Mr. Patrick Yanke. Hi, Patrick. Welcome to the show.
Appreciate it, Brad. Glad to be here.
Yeah. I have to give a big shout out for Marcus Ogden, former NFL player, and has his own podcast, for recommending you on the show. I was very fascinated with your work, simply because you dare to put the word LOV, love, in your one sheet. And so we're going to be talking about this because anything that has to do with passion, or we spend some time listening or caring, or even the jobs we do it out of a sense of a type of love for what we do. Am I right on that?
Absolutely. That's our sense of purpose. That's what we're directing ourselves toward. It's our mission, essentially. So this is what I'm here to do.
I'm a baby boomer, so I kind of sit here and go, what are you talking about? My dad's voice is in the back of my head, that Great Depression voice that says, what the hell are you talking about? Sorry to swear. It's really like, you need to get a job. You weren't paddled enough. There's that old generation there. So this is kind of a unique perspective on this. And I'm excited to take a deep dive into this.
Absolutely. This is my passion. This is my mission. This is what I love doing.
Good. Well, I'm going to read some of your bio, but why do people and organizations fail? I mean, have you ever thought about it, folks? Ultimately, failure is the result of a loss of vision. What animated the inception of new ideas tends to fade over time. But does it have to? Hmm. Is there a way to keep perspective during dry daily routines or difficult situations? My guest today, Patrick Yankee, is a military veteran with experience in both Army and Air Force, and the author of The Personal Rosary, and the co-author of Cracking the Rich Code, Volume 10. Love drives us forward and illuminates the desires of our hearts. Fear asks, what's the worst that can happen? While love vows, the best we can give. Fear is a manifestation of selfishness, while love is the realization of altruism. Please welcome to the show, Patrick Yankee.
Thank you. Somewhere out there, I'm sure I'm hearing applause.
Yay. Jim Collins says this. I love this in his first book, Good to Great. And he says this. He says, people don't leave bad companies. They leave bad management. And I think a lot of your work today, one of the things that he talks about is legacy. And your work, I think, resonates with all of this. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So when you talk about like legacy and what a business is about, I used to teach junior achievement. And the fundamental thing that I would teach the kids is that businesses come into being to fill a need. If they're not filling a need somewhere in society, then they're not going to make it. Sometimes you have visionary leaders like a Steve Jobs that defines a new need that the world didn't even know it had. That was kind of his thing to do, was to say, okay, you need this, trust me. But generally, if a business has to fulfill a need, so then that defines purpose and that defines mission. I like to say that if the economy were to completely pass away and we had to start over, well, some enterprising young soul is going to say, well, you guys need water. I can bring that. You guys can pay me for that. Someone's going to say, well, you need food. I've got some farm stuff over here, so I'll make food and you can pay me for that. Here comes another economy again, and we start going. But it starts because there are needs and there are people that want to fulfill those needs.
I find this fascinating. You started out your career in the Army and then got shoved over to Air Force. And you really found that this helped you in learning about leadership. I got to hear how this happened. So can you please share?
Absolutely. So it wasn't so much that I started in the Army and got shoved into the Air Force. In a way, I was after the Air Force and got shoved into the Army. I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy since I was 8 years, not eight, since I was in the eighth grade in school. You know, your father gives you advice when you're growing up, and one of the things my dad taught me was that you're going to spend a whole lot of time out of every day doing a job. Make sure it's something you enjoy. So one of our times going to the Air Force Base and watching the Thunderbirds fly, I said, I want to do that. So that started me on my my trek to get to the Air Force Academy. But I didn't make it on my first try. And so I was offered prep school, and the prep school turned out to be Marion Military Institute, which is an Army prep school. And in preparation for that, I went to basic training up in Fort Knox. And real drill instructors and all that. It was geared toward, being at Marion Military Institute. So it wasn't like full on Army basic training, but it was the real drill instructors. It was the real program. It was real training. And what struck me was how the leaders always went last. If we're out on a camping expedition or whatever else, you make sure your people are bedded down, and then you bed yourself down. If there's food to be had, you make sure all your people get through the chow line, and then you go last. And that is my foundations in leadership is that style of you take care of the people who take care of the mission. Then my goal again was to get to the Air Force Academy, and through Marion, I did get my appointment. I did get to the academy and went back through basic training. So I like to describe myself as a glutton for punishment. But the Air Force has a little different vibe to it because when you're actually in the active duty Air Force, let's say you got an air crew on a C-130 or something like that, and you got the pilots who are officers piloting the plane, and you've got the load master and the people in the back that are working with the loads in the back, and those are enlisted. And when you land, the officers go off to their bivouac where they're going to stay in lodging. The enlisted go to theirs. You get your crew rest. You come back to the plane. But there is no officers looking after the enlisted in that environment. In many cases, actually, the enlisted looking after the officers and making sure the officers are bedded down. And you can see that there's a little bit of a disconnect in the way Army sees leadership versus the Air Force. But then when you take a step back, you start to realize that actually it's the same vision of leadership applied in a different model. Both are taking care of their warfighters. And in the Air Force, the warfighters tend to be the officers who are sitting in the cockpit of the F-15 or the C-5 or whatever airframe they're flying. But the warfighters tend to be the officers. So they get in their crew rest or whatever else, so they can go and they can fight again. The officers tend to be somewhat pampered in that regard, that they're the warfighters that are actually going into combat. And in the Army, it tends to be the grunt that's out in the trench, but you're still taking care of your warfighters. So following on from my military experience, I went to A.G. Edwards, Fortune 500 company, had Fortune 500 training, and you find the same mentality. A.G. Edwards is saying, yeah, we're going to take care of you because you're taking care of your clients, and that's how we make money, is by you being successful. Same model applied in another way. So that's what I've learned about leadership, is that by seeing these different types of leadership models, is that your number one mission as a leader is to take care of the people who have contact with the enemy, and the enemy being your customer and that sort of thing, the people you're out there to serve, the mission.
That's a fantastic observation. And I've always found this part of leadership unusual. We can always spot bad leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we know what it looks like.
Yeah, we know exactly what it looks like, but it's much harder to define good leadership. But we know when we see it. Do you have like a list of 5 principles that people really have to follow if they want to be a great leader?
I do actually. Every speaker has to have their acronym. So yes. I have an acronym. And I'll preface this a little bit in the fact that we know what bad leadership looks like. It tends to be lazy, honestly. And I approach it from the carrot and the stick approach. Everyone understands what a stick is. You can be on a playground. Little kids understand what a stick is. I pick up a stick. You either do what I tell you, I'm going to beat you with it. And that's unfortunately what a lot of people's style of leadership is. I hold sway over your paycheck. I hold sway over your time off. Whatever the case may be, you either do what I say or I'm going to beat you over the head with it. And so we understand bad leadership because we see it, but it's that way because it's lazy, because somebody who actually wants to really be a leader has to get in there and find out what everyone's cake looks like. Some people's cake is carrot cake and some people's is chocolate cake, but what that translates into is this person may be about personal advancement, maybe about education and training, maybe about their family, whatever the case might be. Why are they here? What are they working toward? You as a leader need to dive in find out what your people are actually motivated by and motivate them with it. That way you raise them up, you lead them forward, as opposed to the guy with the stick beating people over the head. So my five principles of leadership really boil down to, really it's the four cardinal virtues plus love, because the cardinal virtues, prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude, these are expressed in antiquity by the philosophers, but they're also included in things like in Christian theology and the rest. I mean, it's
Right.
fairly universal. And with those, you've also got love, which binds all of those together. So my five principle of leadership, first you got communication, and there's the prudence. There's, prudence is knowing what you ought to do and making sure that gets done. So my first principle is communication. And so it's up to you as a leader to communicate to your people what their mission is, but then also have that communication be a two-way street, because they're also going to communicate back with you. If you're not listening, then you're missing most of what's being said. Then you've got accompaniment. Accompaniment is justice. That's where you expect something of your people, you need to model it. So you expect them to be there early, be there before them. You expect them to stay there late, be the last one gone. You expect them to dress a certain way, have a certain style, you need to model that. Whatever you expect of your people, you need to set the example. That's that accompaniment, being with them in the mission. Then you've got responsibility. You can't delegate away your own responsibility. Whatever goes wrong in this organization is going to be on your shoulders. But what you can do is that you can give responsibility to people as much as they're able to accept it. And then you can nurture and mold them through that. And what that's going to do for you is going to build leaders of the future. No matter who you are, you're going to die someday, or you're going to get hurt, or whatever the case might be. Someday someone's going to have to step into your role. So you're raising leaders of the future by giving responsibility, but also taking the responsibility on yourself. And we have a tendency when it comes to that to say, when someone comes to us and says they screwed up, we tend to hit them over the head.
Right.
Not recognizing that if this is a well-meaning employee who screwed up, you now have your best trained employee. They learn that this doesn't work and they're going to try to do better. It's the difference between recognizing if somebody screwed up because they don't care, or recognizing that they made an honest mistake. The honest mistake is one of those that just trained your employee very well. Then there's the evolution. The evolution is making sure that your people and the mission are evolving, the organization. Make sure you've got 5 and 10-year plans, knowing your people, what their goals are, and helping them reach their own goals, giving them the training they need and all that to raise up the people. That's that evolution that goes into the company. And then as you've gone through all of that, after you've done all these things, now comes service. This is where the love comes in. That's service is putting it all in action. You need help doing the mission. How do I help you? How do I support you? I'm here not to just tell you what needs to be done, but to be doing it with you. That's that service. And the way that applies to cardinal virtues, like I said, communication is the prudence, the accompaniment is the justice, the responsibility is temperance, and the evolution is the fortitude, marching forward to the future. And then love is all the virtues in action. That's the service. That's where you're actually applying that to all of them. So every speaker has to have their acronym. My acronym is the servant leader cares. If you paid attention to the first letters of all those,
Yes.
the servant leader cares.
I love that. That is really good. Is this in the book, The Personal Rosary?
It is in a different way, because I think those who understand the Rosary, it's a Catholic devotional, right?
Yes, I was Catholic.
And so there's four sets of mysteries. There's the joyful mysteries where we reflect on Christ coming into the world. You have the luminous mysteries, reflecting on who he is in his person and in us in communion with him. The sorrowful mysteries with his passion and death, and then the glorious mysteries, we're looking at resurrection to heaven. So what I see in them is a repetition over and over again of the cardinal virtues, most directly applied to the sorrowful mysteries. The first sorrowful mystery is the agony in the garden. What is Jesus saying there? Thy will be done. There's that prudence. You got the scourging at the pillars, the second one. Well, there's that justice where Jesus pays for all of our sins. Then you've got the crowning of thorns. The only crown he ever accepted in life was a crown of thorns, although he was offered a crown of gold. After he fed the 5,000, he knew they wanted to make him a king, so he left. So the only crown he ever accepted was a crown of suffering, a crown of love. There's that temperance. And the carrying the cross is diligence, is that fortitude of marching forward, even to your own destruction in obedience to God. And then there's the love, the charity. When you're looking at the cross, you're looking at the greatest image of love possible. God came into this world to give his life that you could go to heaven. That's the greatest image of love possible, is Jesus on the cross. So there
Yeah.
you've got the four cardinal virtues encapsulated at the end by love. And I see that repeated through all the mysteries of the Rosary as the cardinal virtues.
That's incredibly powerful. We had Chris Widener on the show, and he did a video series called Jesus, Master of Influence. And I've often thought, um, the Bible is filled with so much powerful imagery if you try to place yourself at that time period. And I always felt that Jesus was a master communicator,
Oh, absolutely.
because if you can talk to 5,000 people and keep them happy and just give them fish and bread and they still stick around for 5 hours, you must be saying something pretty deep. Do you find that the best leaders are the best communicators?
Generally true. Again, you have to get people on the same page. If you have a mission to accomplish, then the leader needs to be the one that explains the mission to others in a way that they understand their role in it. One of my jobs in the Air Force, when I graduated from the Air Force Academy, remember I said I wanted to be a pilot? Well, I graduated
Yeah.
in 1993. That was the drawdown from the Gulf War. They didn't need any more pilots, so I didn't become a pilot. Instead, my first job was as a food service officer. And honestly, in the Air Force, you know, what they told me at the time is that you got a lot of people that wash out of their other tech schools that end up like in food service because they, a job to do. So a lot of those people, just like me, didn't intend to be there. But one thing that I told my folks, I said, you need to understand your role in this mission. If we get deployed to an environment where we've got to do fighting with the enemy and that sort of thing, if the Air Force forgets the bombs and the bullets, then they're going to wait for those to arrive. If they forget the food, they're going home.
Right.
If you don't see yourself as mission critical, then you've missed something, because you are mission critical. The reason there is a food service in the military is because food and water and the rest is a vital service to the service. So you may not have seen yourself as very prestigious when you washed out of another school to come here, but the reality is you are the linchpin over everything else functions. So that kind of communication to the people that are working for you is important. Let them know what their role is, how they fit into the mission.
God bless you, man. Reframing things is not easy. When you wanted to be a pilot, now you're peeling potatoes, and you're making sure that
Yep.
food is arriving on time. That's a big fall from grace, and to find that, I think, is incredibly powerful, because your purpose within any organization and even your family, I think, is incredibly important. Um, I did want to ask you this question. A lot of leaders, I've seen this, and I consult with companies as well on generational issues.
Mhm.
Uh, there is a huge disconnect sometimes between what leadership believes they're doing and what is actually happening. And the people at the bottom and the front lines, they're like, these people are out of touch with reality. How do you bridge that gap? How do you help people get on the same page and row or fly in formation in the same direction?
Well, that's that service aspect. You can communicate, accompany, give responsibility, evolve the organization. You can do all those things perfectly well and still have an organization that is floundering. That's where service comes in. That's the love. That's the love part of it, where and the carrot and stick approach again. The only way you understand what someone's carrot looks like is to get out there with them and see what they're doing. So what happens generally is that your CEO, the C-suite or whatever, tends to get insulated by management. You got the middle management there. Below them, they've got the frontline workers. Above them, they've got the C-suite. And typically, your middle managers are very much ambitious about where they want to go with their careers. So they don't let bad news flow up. They don't let the bad things happen under their watch. They're going to sweep it under the rug, whatever the case might be. But your middle managers tend to be a barrier to the people who actually run the company, understanding what's happening inside the company. So the people that are at the top need to actually spend some time with the lower rung folks. Some of your most celebrated leaders in history, Ford and some of these other guys that are major lions of industry, we're famous for being on the assembly lines and actually talking to people down there and how are things going and what can we do to make this better, because they knew that these are the guys who are turning the wrenches that can actually see what the flaws are in the system,
Yeah.
and the middle managers, they don't have a clue. Their job is to
Yeah.
manage people, but his job, he knew, was to make cars. How do we make cars better? You go ahead and manage people all you want. I want to know how to make cars better, and that's going to come from the guys on the front lines.
Yeah. I used to tell my employees this, years ago, I started a small design firm in New York City. And within 18 months, suddenly we are going public on NASDAQ. I got 60 employees and,
Wow.
it was chaos. And I told every one of my employees, I said, we have an open door policy, but I'm going to say this, do not bring a problem to me unless you also bring the solution to me. Because we can't be everywhere all at once. And the other thing that I was a big fan of is employee created branches of our company that were created just because they were on the front lines and they could see a problem or a need. There's either a problem or a need. And we created 4 divisions just from employee suggestions and had them
Nice.
manage it, whoever did it. What other techniques do you encourage some of these companies that you work with to get that connection from the bottom up rather than the top down?
Well, I will say the one thing that you said kind of struck me a little bit, that you got to be a little careful when you say don't bring me a problem without a solution also, is because sometimes they don't know what a solution is, and therefore you're not going to hear the problem. It's a little bit like being on the Titanic, when the guys are down there in the boiler rooms and the water's flowing in.
We
You need
got
to be
water.
telling the management there's a problem down here. I don't have a solution for it, but there's a problem down here. So I think it's
Yeah,
important to keep a fully open door policy.
right,
Don't waste my time, but I need to know what's going on in my company.
right,
So I have a fully open door policy. You need to come tell me anything. Bring a solution if you can, but you need the open door policy is one of the most important things.
right.
The C on the servant leader cares is communication. And it's not just there because prudence tends to come first when you're talking about the cardinal virtues. It's also given a right of prominence, because without communication, everything else falls apart. So there has to be that open door policy where you can tell me anything. I'm not going
Hmm.
to shoot the messenger. I want to know what's going on. And if you're wasting my time, I'll tell you to get out of my office. And if you're not wasting my time, then let's find a way to solve this problem. But that open door policy is important. Too many people talk about having an open door policy, but end up shooting the messenger. Why are you telling me this?
Right.
I don't want to know these bad things. Go talk to your manager. You didn't follow the chain of command. All that sort of stuff. No, if
Yeah.
somebody comes with a problem, listen to it.
Blah blah blah. I'm not listening. Blah, 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 I'm not listening. That kind of thing.
Go fill out this form in triplicate, send it to your manager, and sometime in the next few months, maybe it'll trickle up to me through the chain of command. Yeah, okay. Well, by that point, whatever the problem was is metastasized.
Well, during the dot-com boom, I remember the CEO of Cisco, uh, Chambers. He basically said, "Of all the mistakes I've ever made, it's because I didn't move fast enough." And I'm paraphrasing. And he realized, when Cisco's price, share price went from something like $86 a share, plunged to 11, he realized he had to do something. And so he got rid of 3,000 products that they had. John Chambers did this. And he turned around and he gave 2 groups autonomy to just buy companies. One was for like a million and up, and the other was for $1 billion companies. And they started to buy and integrate and got rid of all the fat. So, it's that sometimes we're the bottleneck. I hate to say it. Am I right?
Sure, exactly. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies. We don't want to hear bad news, but
Right.
it's the bad news that you need to know. And something that you mentioned there about getting rid of all these different lines and whatever else. There tends to be a drift in companies as well. As you grow, you tend to get into more things. Apple now with this Vision Pro, that's still a computer. That's good, right?
Right.
But then we're also talking about autonomous cars. Would you want an Apple autonomous car? I don't. They're kind of getting their hands in a lot of different areas where you start to wonder and say, okay, are we kind of drifting a little bit here? You're a computer company, and you look back in history, and one of the greatest examples I love to give people is Kodak. There was a time when Kodak was synonymous with pictures. Everyone,
Yeah.
I'm taking a Kodak, it's almost like Glass Plus. I'm using Glass Plus,
Right.
whether or not I'm using Glass Plus. But what happened is they were actually one of the pioneers of digital cameras.
Yep.
But what they saw was this digital camera is going to make obsolete all of our physical products over here, the film that we do and the copiers and all that sort of stuff. So they shelved it, and they're no
Yeah.
longer in business because other people ran with it. So you got to get back to what is your core mission. Our core
Right.
mission is, in the case of Kodak, pictures, whatever form they're in, not these products that we're suddenly wedded to. But that's again how companies tend to lose vision. That's when the bean counters come in. The founders and the visionary leaders came in and they defined a mission that they wanted to do. But then when it goes to the next level tends to look at it and say, okay, we've got a cash cow here. How do we keep milking the cash cow? And the bean counters are more worried about what they have to lose than what they have to give, and that's how things start to fall apart.
I agree with you. I think they get comfortable, and it's some irony today that you're talking about Kodak because I'm doing some research while I'm ghostwriting a client's book, and Steve Sasson created the digital camera while at Kodak back in like 75. And he comes to them, and this thing's the size of a toaster. And he's integrated, a camcorder and some other technology, and he's integrated it all. And he showed it to the executives at Kodak, and they're like, nah, no, we're not interested. But they said he can keep working on it. And what happened is, and this happens in so many business sectors, I hate to say it, they didn't want to do the camera because the digital camera, because at that time Kodak was the most popular camera in the world. Didn't matter what you bought, Instamatic, whatever. And they were making so much money on the film processing and the film buying that you actually put in the camera that was
Exactly.
really hard to see that maybe in 20, 30 years that would be obsolete. And by the way, they were making so much money off of their black and white photography because they use real silver in black and white photography. That's a pretty penny. They were making real money. And Steve kept working on the digital camera, perfected it, obviously, but they still couldn't see the market for it. And so they licensed that technology to Nikon. So if you bought a Nikon, I think it was back in the late 80s, early 90s, if you bought a Nikon, you were actually getting a digital Nikon camera, you were actually getting Kodak technology in there. But it was Sony that came along and just, boom, saturated the market. And I find this fascinating that you brought this up because this happens in other business sectors. I mean, it's happening in the car and automobile industry right now, where we have 100-year-old technology being thrust upon us, and we don't quite know what to do. Do you see this in any other business sectors or any of the work that you do where there's this massive resistance simply because we're making plenty of money right now? Why should we change?
I said almost every industry.
Hmm.
You know, we they get that complacency. The CEO tends to think that their job is to make money for the company and forget that there is actually a core mission. So whatever makes money for the company, that's what we're going to do. And
Right.
you come to them with an idea that they think is going to take away from their revenues, just like with Kodak, and that idea then is put out the window because it's going to cost us money, forgetting to
Yeah.
see what the long-term benefits are. Now, you let somebody actually develop the idea, say, okay, let's see where this technology may go, and you might be onto something. I give a lot of props to Apple, by the way. I pick on them a little bit when they bring up like the car stuff because it's just so funny. But
Yeah.
but like the Vision Pro, for example, I don't have one, but you can bet that I'm probably going to be a fourth generation buyer. I want the price to come down. I want the technology to mature. But this beta model they put out, the videos that I've watched of that thing, that is the computing of the future. That
Yeah.
is the computer of the future. Just like when they brought out the iPhone that changed the entire industry, that's what this Vision Pro is going to be.
Yeah.
So but recognizing that, anybody at Apple who didn't have the vision for it certainly could have looked at that and said, who's going to want VR? Well, this is so much more than VR. This is your computer on your face, everything you need right there. And that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, people don't realize virtual reality kind of started with these online games, these
Mhm.
World of Warcraft and things like this. And uh, companies like IBM were putting a lot of money into developing real-time ability inside these like Second Life worlds, where
Sure.
this is a good example. They had gas stations that architects would come in and they'd build the whole gas station for you. And anybody anywhere in the world, no matter what oil company, you could come in and take a look at these architectural renderings, spin the whole thing around and duplicate whatever it was and pay to download the blueprints. And the whole thing was all online. It was in 3 dimensions. You could see it. And if you had any other questions, you could get back to the company that designed all these gas stations. We are seriously in the future right now. There is no more science fiction, as I like to say.
It is funny you should bring up the gas stations, though, because if you ever wondered why the gas stations all look alike, you just answered the
Yeah,
question for me.
yeah. It's like a Lego system, it's all universal. Yeah, and the safety regulations, I think, are kind of becoming universal all across the world. There's a certain way of building these. Uh, so it's exciting. Do you have any examples of customers, clients, or anybody individually that you've worked with where you've seen a massive transformation when you start to talk about this giving back, this altruism and love? Um, and do they resist it in the beginning?
So I don't want to put anyone on the spot in terms of saying names, but I'll simply answer in general
Sure.
that, yeah, I have seen that. And usually there is a little bit of resistance. I mean, Hollywood has kind of hurt the name of love because they describe everything as love.
Yeah.
But the true love, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, is willing the best good for someone else. That's all it is. So all of the when we start thinking about unicorns and whatever else in association with love, yeah, we've gotten off the rails and we're talking fantasy here. Let's talk real love. Real
Right.
love is simply willing the best for another person, and if you can do that, then you're reaching outside of yourself and you're focusing on the needs of someone else. There's transformation. So yeah, when you start talking love, a lot of people kind of close down a little bit, especially macho men. What is this love stuff? That doesn't belong in business. We're here to compete. We're on the gridiron of business here, and we're going to go
Yeah.
defeat our enemies. And the what was it? The Sleepless in Seattle with the Godfather memes and that sort of stuff. But
Yeah.
the reality is true leadership and true life actually starts from the heart.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk in a Christian term, Proverbs tells us that everything we do comes from our heart. So we have to train our hearts so they can be oriented in the way that they should be on others, because we can't have a selfish heart. And then once we have done that, then we can give our hearts to others. We can give ourselves in love. We sacrifice ourselves for the good of another. And that's the definition of love. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, there's a lot of resistance at first. People see unicorns and whatever else coming out. And I don't want to be that weak-willed, weak person that I see in the movies and whatever else. But that's not what love is.
Yeah.
Love is Christ on the cross, not a weak person.
Right. I laugh at you saying that because men, we have a tendency to tease each other, and mock each other, and that's
No,
just our natural,
no.
just our natural way of doing things. And yeah, I've had guys, give me a hard time about something, and I said, yes, I like herbal teas. Go ahead, make fun of me. But I also have a black belt, so there's that. So
And you display it proudly on the wall behind you.
yeah, we're gonna have a new studio next year, so that's coming. But I was never an athlete, so to even achieve something like this, I'm like, oh, I can't believe it. But I will say this: let's talk about the generational issues because
Mhm.
I feel in leadership, we have baby boomers like myself. My first bosses would regale me with stories of World War II and Vietnam and the Great Depression, and I had to suffer through all that. But there was a hierarchy and a structure and a one way to do everything, just about. And now we have a new generation, several new generations that have completely different needs, wants, expectations, and ways of doing things. From, Gen X to millennials to Gen Z, we have very, very different needs, wants, and expectations, not only from leadership, but our own actualization within an organization. Each generation has something different and the reason why they're showing up. So can we talk a little bit about that? Because that's a tough role today.
It is. The generational leadership, especially when you're dealing with love, that's again, that's that challenge to go out there and actually get to know your people and what matters
Right.
to them and what their goals and intentions are. And generationally, that changes. I heard a fascinating study a couple years ago that our formative years are our teenage years, our high school years generally. And if you want to see how a generation is going to think, you can look at media and that sort of thing that they're looking at in that time. So I go back to the World War II generation. What were they doing in their formative years? They were fighting a war.
Right.
They're fighting World War II for peace and freedom around the world, and that very much solidified who they were as a generation.
Yeah.
And of course, media and everything was associated on that. Going back to my own generation, I grew up, came of age in the '80s, and yeah, a lot of my worldview I can see is formed very much by that. And then you got the '90s and you got the 2000s. But if you want to truly understand a generation, look at the media that they consume in that environment. Look at the movies that are
Right.
popular in that environment. And yeah, it does fluctuate. You go from the Marlboro Man as the image of the perfect man to Hugh Grant falling on his face and looking like an idiot as the image of what women want. And I'm sorry, but what women want drives the world because men conform to what women want. So we see it in the
Exactly.
movies. This is what women want. We're going to change and be part of that. But that forms a generation. So yeah, I would say that one of the best ways to get to know the next generation or a generation is to look at the media they've consumed in their most formative years.
It's ironic you talk about this because in my first book, Liquid Leadership, I talk about what influenced Gen X. And one of the things that influenced them the most was Sega and Nintendo came into the homes. That's a computer, even though it's visually driven, it's a video game. And John
Sure.
Hughes films, such as 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Goonies, even. And a lot of generational experts, they like to say, well, it was 9/11 or it was this. Well, to really change behavior took some major day-to-day activities that actually shifted everything. So Gen X is really the first real latchkey kids as a group because mom and dad had to be out working. So their
Sure.
sense of responsibility and childhood was very different than, let's say, baby boomers who had mom at home usually. Now, I was raised differently. I was raised more like a Gen Xer. I was alone and on my own a lot. But this generational issue, I think, is probably one of the more important aspects. It's affecting all levels in business and church, even teaching, everything, simply because they're not leaning forward the way previous generations did into those business areas and life expectations. Yeah, I'm
Sure.
sure
But
you
we've
find
also
that to be
mentioned a little
true.
bit on, but we've also mentioned a little bit about faith. And one thing that a lot of recent studies are finding is that a lot of the younger generations, they want orthodox faith. They can look around and they can see that the world is shifting sands, and you can't trust the media, you can't trust this, you can't trust that. They want something they can trust. So when they
Right.
see the church is drifting, you find that most of the younger generations, they're gravitating toward an orthodox faith because they don't want that shifting sand and something so bedrock in their lives.
I agree with that. And I think that's important. We're getting back to some basic values. They say that cycles return. And I
Yeah.
think sort of this loosey goosey way of living, I never bought into that. I was raised Catholic as well. You were raised Catholic, I'm sure. Um,
Yep.
and so all the rituals and the kneeling and the standing and, that meant something. It meant a lot to me. And when my mother died, I got her Bible. I made sure I got it. And she wrote a little passage in there for me. Those
Hmm.
things are important in our world because I think we have too many outside sources trying to pull us out of those traditional values that worked for thousands of years for the family unit simply because you couldn't be bamboozled.
Hmm.
If someone came into your life and tried to, sway you with some of the nonsense I hear today, you would just burst out laughing because you had a deep connection to your faith, your community, and your parents. The word
Sure.
teenager didn't appear until like the 50s when teenagers were separating from the family unit and getting jobs and separating and having different music. When I was growing up, I listened to some of the same music as my mom and dad did. That
As did
didn't
I.
happen. Yeah, that didn't happen before World War II. Your politics, your church, uh, almost everything was in alignment with what your parents had done and your great grandparents. And
Yep.
so, do you see that that shift has really changed our world?
It has. And a lot of that again goes back to media. We didn't used to have the ubiquity. I don't think it's even a word, but we didn't used to have media so in our face. And
Right.
what media has done is to solidify what used to be the butt of jokes. We talk about the generational divide. The generational divide used to be just simply that the youth is wasted on the young. Now the generational divide is we don't understand each other at all, and we're okay with that. Actually, you go do you,
Yeah.
and I'll do me. And you look at like Disney programming and that sort of thing. I won't even let my kids watch Disney shows because so many of those shows show the kids disrespecting their parents and the parents disrespecting the kids. And this has become a way of life. And this is how children are being
Yeah.
raised. And so many kids are on media as a way of raising. Going back to that laziness, we had that laziness in our homes as well. Lazy leaders pick up the stick to beat you. Well, lazy homes turn on the TV to raise your kids. And
Yeah.
so that media is more present. It used to be back in the 60s and 70s when you watch things in the movies, these things were jokes that were said at the time that
Yeah.
now have become part of our reality and they're celebrated. So media has been a huge part of that, the evolution of the psyche, the evolution of the family, the disillusion of the family, seeing the family as something superfluous and something to be made the butt of jokes. And we used to accept the fact that the family is the basis of civilized society. You destroy the family, you destroy society.
Yeah.
But now it's the butt of jokes. And that has been driven by a societal shift that happened a little bit, mostly through, like comedy and whatever else,
Yeah.
and has been accelerated by media that's actually mainstreamed all those things.
Yeah. Well, if you look at some of the television shows that you and I grew up with, I'm a little bit older than you, but I grew up with, we had Leave It to Beaver, and then we
I leave it.
evolved. Yeah, we evolved into the Jeffersons, or All in the Family, where they were having real issues at the time, but nobody changed their mind about things because they were part of a family unit that stood within and protected their family. George Jefferson
Exactly.
would go off if anybody said anything about Lionel. Archie Bunker was a conservative, and he sat there and he goes, "These are our values and these are what we stand by." And he wasn't going to be swayed by the newest whatever paradigm shift. And so, we learned to laugh at ourselves more back then. Even watching Blazing Saddles, some people get very upset at Blazing Saddles today. But the reality is these movies were more in alignment with reality. Whereas today, I feel like a lot of leaders, even in business, I see this a lot. They want everybody to be paid the same, let's put it that way, or they want, these kumbaya moments. And those can happen in the right environments. But I feel like they are a deterrent to actually achieving our goals, whether it's business or family or faith or even education. The goal is to create a better person in your progeny, your offspring, or your employees. I always want my employees to be way smarter than me. And I think
Absolutely.
we've lost touch with that.
No, that's the mark of a leader. You know, when you look at again, it goes back to the bad leaders and the good leaders. The bad leaders that have their stick in their hand to beat people, they're also very possessive of their rank and title. And you get somebody that works underneath them, and they're fearful this person's going to end up taking their job, make them look bad or whatever else, because that person's smarter than me. So they tend to push out the good people because the good people are going to make them look bad. And again, you got a rotting organization. Whereas your best leaders are actually hiring the best people they can find, recognizing that these people are probably better than them in many ways, especially at the particular jobs you hired them to do. And then you want to make them even better. You want to train them, give them everything that they need to get better. That's what a leader truly does. You look at like the president of the United States. The president of the United States isn't there to run the country. That's not his job. He runs the executive branch. That's his job. And he hires the best people to be in charge of the cabinet positions. And the best people in those cabinet positions are probably way smarter than he is in most everything that he does. But
Right.
as the leader, his job is to put the right person on the right job so that job gets done. And then the buck stops with him, whether or not it gets done. That's the
Right.
mark of a leader, is you want to surround yourself with the best people possible because you're devoted to the mission. The best people are going to get that mission done.
Phenomenal. Thank you, Patrick Yankee. How do we get a hold of you, Patrick, if we need to get a hold of you?
Well, my main webpage is www.yankeeacademy.com. And that's Yankee with one E. That's very important. You have to buy vowels and we're cheap. So it's www.yankeeacademy.com. That's for my speaking and writing generally. But then you mentioned that I've got the Personal Rosary. I actually have my own site for the Personal Rosary. It's its own separate thing. And that's www.thepersonalrosary.com. But through there's contact me and all that sort of stuff. Make it simple.
What made you want to write the Personal Rosary? What inspired you?
Oh, here we go. So this is where we're going to get into just a little bit, and I'll try not to filibuster. But you know, there are a lot of people. When you look back in history, the Rosary came about somewhere around the 1200s or so, and it was a devotional tool. The local people wanted to be able to worship like the monks did, and the monks were able to recite, all 150 of the Psalms and that sort of thing. So they gave them simple devotionals because at the time you had an illiterate people; they couldn't learn all the
Right.
Psalms like they did. So they gave them simple prayers. So a favorite prayer was like the Hail Mary. Okay, so we'll put that out here, and the Our Father. We put this out here. So it started off with just, you can say these things while we're saying the Psalms. Then it evolved over time where they assigned the mysteries of Christ's life to those. And of course, we're talking 150. So you had three sets of mysteries. You had the joyful mysteries with his coming into the world. You had the sorrowful mysteries with his passion and death. And you had the glorious mysteries with resurrection and going on to heaven. And then back in the 80s or so, John Paul II gave us the luminous mysteries. And you find a lot of purists in the church right now who resist the luminous mysteries. These are newfangled. But what I tell to them is the entire rosary is newfangled as far as the church is concerned.
Yeah.
We go back to the time of Christ and the founding of the church, and the rosary came along somewhere around 1200 or 1300 AD. I mean, it is newfangled. But
Yeah.
because I found that resistance, one time I was invited to speak, and somebody asked me, "How do you pray?" And I said, "Okay, well, this is what I've been taught by the church. It's an acronym called ACTS, ACTS. It's adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, and supplication. And you find all of those in our Lord's Prayer, the adoration and the contrition and the thanksgiving, and the supplication. And then as I got to talking, got to thinking about, and I also like to do the Rosary. And then I had a revelation on the luminous mysteries, because my personal calling is teaching people to live the mysteries of the Rosary. Well, it's easy to live the joyful mysteries. We all come into this world and we have an early life. It's easy to live the sorrowful mysteries because we experience it in our own lives and we know we're going to die someday. And it's easy to relate to the glorious mysteries because we know that we believe in the resurrection of the body and going to heaven. It's easy to relate to those. How do you relate to the luminous mysteries where he changes water into wine and he glows like the sun? I can't do those things. And then it finally dawned on me, though, the first luminous mystery is the baptism. He's proclaimed the Son of God.
Yes.
In the second mystery, it's the wedding of Cana. He's subservient to his mother. His mother says, "Do this." And he says, "All right, fine, Mom, I'll do it." Then you've got the third one is preaching the kingdom, his kingship. You've got the fourth one is the transfiguration. He's coming as a prophet, explaining the wisdom and counsels of God. And then the fifth one is the Eucharist. He's behaving as a priest. So there you have it. Son of God, Son of Man, King, prophet, and priest. That's his identity, and that's our identity in communion with him. So I went back and I looked to see whether or not the church had written anything about that. I could find where nobody had done that. I said, okay, fine, I'm writing a book. So that's the basis for the book and the reason I wrote.
God bless you, man. That is awesome. And I truly mean that word in the literary sense that it's used, and that is God's all. A lot of God's all. That is amazing.
Thank you.
Wow. I'm always curious when people are inspired to write a book. Because did you ever think you would be a writer when you were a kid, or did this just happen?
Actually, I did. When I was 10 years old, I can remember this very clearly. I was 10 years old, and I've had the title of a book in my head that one day I'm going to write. And the title is Why, with a period. not a question mark, but a period. And the ultimate why is, you go through all these scenarios in life, and why is this the way it is, and why is this? The ultimate why is because God said so. Get over it. It's just the way it is. So, but yes, since I was 10 years old, I knew I wanted to write that. And so here I am writing other things. Maybe I'll get around to it someday.
I think this next generation has missed on one thing, and that is sometimes you just have to accept where you are at the moment, and that's it.
Exactly. Well, it's accepting God's will. That's that prudence. It's accepting this is the will of God. And yes, I want to work and do the best that I possibly can. And then doors open. And when that door open, walk through it. But we have a lack of patience. I see that in my day job. I'm a financial planner. I see that most people make bad mistakes just out of a lack of patience. It's just the way the life is, unfortunately.
Yeah. Great way to end the show. I want to ask, how do you help companies? What is it that you do? I know you do some consulting and things like that, but give us a few details.
Well, really, what I'd like to do is keynote speaking. I want to get out there and share the message. To me, it's very much a ministry. So on the Yankee Academy side of things, that's more of like the secular world and that sort of thing, talking about the servant leadership from the standpoint of the servant leader cares and framing the cardinal virtues in a way that is livable in that regard. But when I get to talk to a religious audience, that's when things come alive, and I can get deeply into the fact that Christ is our best model when it comes to living the cardinal virtues. But I'm a keynote speaker. My job, as I see it, is to inspire. So on the business side of things, the Yankee Academy side of things, I want to come do keynote speaking to major corporations and help them to become better leaders. On the other side, on the religious side of things, the personal rosary side of things, that's very much a mission and ministry for me. And that one's a little more loosey-goosey, and I just go where God leads me on that.
There you go. Reach out, ladies and gentlemen, to Patrick. He's extraordinary. Look up yankeeacademy.com, correct? That one?
Correct, with one E.
One E. And you'll find all the resources you need there. We're going to go into the lightning round if you have a few minutes left. I asked 3 questions of my guests so that our audience gets to know you better. So I guess my first question is, was there ever a moment in your life where you got knocked down hard, dark night of soul, and that's where faith was the only way out?
So there's 2 of them, but I'll give the most recent. The fiscal crisis. I told you I'm a certified financial planner. So when the fiscal crisis came along in 2007, 2008, yeah, my savings are in the markets. My income is in the markets. Everything is tied to the markets, and it's all crashing. How am I going to take care of my family? I literally, on a Saturday morning, was curled up in the fetal position in the bonus room, not knowing what comes next, how I'm going to take care of my family. And then my first grade teacher called, just out of the blue. Patrick, how you doing? I understand, things are bad right now, and how you doing? That got me at least on my feet. And then that very afternoon, I'm at a park teaching my son to ride a bike. And my son is very tall, arms and legs going everywhere like a kabod crane. And he's panicking as I'm running behind him. It's like, Daniel, why are you panicking? I'm right here. Nothing bad has happened to you yet. I haven't let go of you. Just keep your feet on the pedals. And then I had to stop with a tear in my eyes and realize that God's telling that to me. Nothing bad has happened yet. He's still here. Keep my feet on the pedal and keep moving forward. And life got back to normal and I moved on. But yes, that was a rock bottom moment.
Wow. Well, for once, Patrick, you listen to your own advice being thrown out into the world. And it's, wow. I love that you caught it. A lot of people don't catch that golden tongue wisdom. My second question is, do you have a favorite memory?
Oh, wow. Boy, for a lightning round to try to pick a favorite memory. God has been so gracious to me that I can think of a whole lot of things. I can think of my wedding day. I can think of dropping my wife for push-ups because she was an underclassman at the Air Force Academy. I can think of a first child being born. I mean, wow. Playing catch with my son. Honestly, no, I don't have a favorite because God's been so gracious. I've got so many.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful answer. Yeah, I think it's that dash between our birth and our death
Yeah,
where
I'm living the
everything
dash.
resides. You're living the dash, baby. My third and final question is, what is your greatest hope for humanity over the next 20 years?
Oh, this one's easy. Come to faith. Since our fall from grace, the default position is we're headed for hell. That's just reality. And when you look at the language of the Bible, why did Jesus come into this world? He didn't come into this world to give us another alternative. He came in this world to save us. It's salvation. It's get off the road you're on and come to heaven with me. So my greatest hope for humanity is to recognize that call that God wants communion with us. And he is love personified. We can't have communion with love personified until we learn to love ourselves. So, yes, I want to teach people to love authentically. And my goal in this ministry of teaching people to love authentically is that they're going to find communion with God, who loves you more than you can possibly imagine, and who is love personified and wants communion with you for the remainder of your life. Eternity, not just life.
Wow. Patrick, you said a mouthful and a great way to end the show. Thank you so much. And I agree with you. Some people have asked me if I believe in God, and I burst out laughing. I'm like, I would never have been able to achieve anything without God by my side.
No question.
So thank you for being an extraordinary guest here on Awakened Nation today. Thank you, Patrick.
I appreciate the opportunity.
You bet, my brother. Anyways, everybody, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please tune in next week for another great guest here on Awakened Nation. Until then, bye-bye for now. Thank you so much for being a big part of the Awakened Nation movement. This is how you can help me and our extraordinary guests. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share this episode out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And let's grow this movement by word of mouth. Our success is because of you. Thank you, and see you next week.